Okay. So again, thank you all so much for joining us, taking time out of your night to learn a little bit more about the college financing process. All right. So what I like to do with these presentations is I like to kind of break down the process in the form of a Q&A. So I like to answer a lot of our most frequently asked questions in order to really give you guys an idea of how the whole process works. So I do start from the very beginning, go over what types of aid are available, where that aid comes from, and then I go over the application process, determining costs, and then how to cover those costs. So depending where you are in the process, some of this may be old news to you, some of it may be new. So I am just going to go over that entire process. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to go over is what types of aid are available and where does that aid come from? Excuse me. So first we want to understand the sources of financial aid. Okay, so the sources of financial aid is where our aid comes from. Aid comes from the federal and state governments, as well as the university, and then private entities. So when I say private entities, I mean anybody who you may borrow a loan from, any organization that may offer you a scholarship. That's where your financial aid is going to come from, okay? And these sources provide two different types of aid, okay? They provide gift aid as well as self-help aid. Gift aid is, of course, a gift, everybody's favorite kind, free money in the form of grants and scholarships. So gift aid does not have to be repaid. Self-help aid, on the other hand, may have to be repaid, or you have to do something in order to get it, right? So loan options, borrowed money that must be repaid with interest, and then employment opportunities, so working and earning a paycheck. Now I'm just going to break down a little bit of the different types of financial aid that each source offers. So the federal government is pretty well-rounded. They offer grant funding in the form of the federal Pell Grant. They offer federal work study to students, and they offer federal direct loans as well. The state mostly focuses on grant funding, so they offer their most popular, or not most popular, but the program that's the largest, which is the tuition aid grant program. They offer the Garden State Guarantee, the Educational Opportunity Fund, and then NJ STARS 1 and 2. Aid from the university includes grants, so we do have the Stockton Promise and other need-based grants at Stockton, as well as scholarships that are based on merit as well as extracurricular achievement. And then finally, private aid would include, as I mentioned, private scholarships and private loans. I am going to elaborate on a few of those different programs. So the first one that I want to talk about are Stockton scholarships. So at Stockton, we reward academic success. I know I have a wide range of students and parents here tonight, meaning when your entry term may be. So I have a lot of students who are looking at fall of 2026. I have a few students who are looking at beyond that. And then I have some students who are looking to come in this spring of 2026. So I am going to go over aid for both first-time applicants, transfer students, and some information will be specific to anybody coming in the spring. Some information will be specific to fall and years after. But with our scholarships, so first-time applicants, those are our first-year students, we offer scholarships based on merit as well as extracurricular achievement. And what that means is that we review not only your high school transcript to look at your GPA, your grades, we also look at your extracurricular achievement. So we're looking at work experience, volunteerism or community engagement, family responsibilities that you may have had, participation in clubs and organizations, sports, any experiences that are really meaningful to you and have kind of helped shape you into who you are as the student. We want well-rounded students, and we know that students are not just their GPA. So we want, scholarships to kind of show, or we have our scholarships kind of framed to show who the student is as a whole. Other things we'll look at, your essay as well as your letters of recommendation, okay? And then our transfer applicants, anybody who has 16 or more earned transferable non-basic skills credits from a regionally accredited undergrad institution is eligible for transfer scholarships. Those have recently been updated for spring 2026 and beyond. More information on that is available on our website, but there are specific criteria laid out. A minimum 3.4 GPA is required, and we do review transcripts from all previously attended institutions. Okay, the Stockton Promise. This is a need-based financial aid program that covers 100% of the gap between federal, state, and institutional financial aid, so your grants and scholarships, and the cost of tuition and fees for qualifying students. So what the Stockton Promise does is it will take your cost of tuition and fees, subtract any other federal, state, and institutional grants and scholarships, and then if there's a gap, meaning that your grants and scholarships weren't enough to cover the entire cost of tuition and fees, then the Stockton Promise will fill in that gap. So anybody who's eligible for this would be paying a $0 net price for tuition and fees. Some of the eligibility criteria includes that you have to be a New Jersey resident, you have to have between 0 and 59 earned credits, and your family's adjusted gross income has to be between 0 and 65,000. There's no separate application for the Stockton Promise, though. You just have to complete the FAFSA, or NJ Dreamers will complete the New Jersey Alternative application, which I'll talk about both of those more in detail in a minute. But you'll complete those applications, and that's your application for the Stockton Promise, okay? There are more eligibility criteria and additional information that's available at stockton.edu/promise. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the Garden State Guarantee. So this program is very similar to the Stockton Promise. It is a state-funded program, so this program comes directly from the state of New Jersey, but it pretty much does the same thing as the Stockton Promise. It's a last dollar program that was created to assist New Jersey residents in affording the cost of their education. So what it does is it takes the difference between your cost of tuition and fees, any other grants and scholarships, federal, state, institutional, and the Garden State Guarantee also includes private. So private scholarships will reduce Garden State Guarantee, okay? It is counted in that calculation. But it would enable you to pay a $0 net price for tuition and fees if you qualify. This grant is available to New Jersey residents with 60 to 128 earned credits whose family adjusted gross income meets the criteria outlined by the state of New Jersey. Again, there's no separate application for the Garden State Guarantee. You'll apply each year by filing a FAFSA or the New Jersey Alternative application, which is for New Jersey Dreamers. I do just want to mention that there is also information available on our website, the additional eligibility criteria, all that good information. Okay, next we're going to talk about the Educational Opportunity Fund. This is another state-funded program. It's not specifically a financial aid program, but there is a financial aid component to EOF. What EOF does is it ensures meaningful access to higher education for New Jersey residents from backgrounds of economic and educational disadvantage. EOF students receive a lot of different supports and a lot of different benefits. So one of them, of course, is financial. There is grant funding available to EOF students. But in addition, EOF students are able to receive free college credits when they attend the Interactive Summer Academy before they start in the program. Free calculator rental. EOF students are able to attend different field trips and conferences, network with their peers as well as professionals, and access to student success coaches. So they have designated coaches that are there for them to kind of help them navigate all of the the entire college process, really. So any questions that they have, they can go to them. EOF is a really big family. That's how it feels. Stockton in general is a big family. We're not a giant school. Everyone, you kind of feel like you know each other and you're all in it together. So EOF is very similar, just on a different scale. So you're going to apply by filing the FAFSA or the NJ Alternative application for New Jersey Dreamer students. So again, there's no separate application for EOF. There are additional screenings, however. So what I would recommend doing is speaking to Michelle in admissions. If you are interested in EOF, if you think that you meet some of these criteria, this is the income and asset criteria for EOF. If you think that you may meet, this criteria, you'll file your FAFSA, and then you will check with Michelle in admissions, and she'll be able to go over the entire process for you. It's a little bit different in applying to Stockton. If you've already applied, that's okay. But there is a little bit of a separate process that you'll have to go through to apply to our EOF program. And more information is available at stockton.edu/EOF. Okay, so now that we've talked a little bit about what aid is available and where that aid comes from, now I didn't go over everything, but I felt like that was a good chunk of some of the major programs. Now we're going to talk about how to actually apply for financial aid. So some of you may not have applied for financial aid just yet. we're going to go over exactly how to apply all of the different steps. So U.S. citizens and eligible non-citizens will file the free application for federal student aid, or the FAFSA, each year to determine their eligibility for federal, state, and some institutional aid programs. And the FAFSA is typically available each October 1st. So you'll fill it out October 1st for the following aid year. So for example, if you are thinking of attending in fall 2026 or spring 2027, then you're going to fill out the 26-27 FAFSA, and that was available this past October 1st. If you're thinking of attending in spring, then you're going to fill out the 25-26 FAFSA, which has been available since last October. And New Jersey Dreamer students are undocumented students who meet certain criteria established by the state of New Jersey. If you think you may be a New Jersey Dreamer student, you will complete the New Jersey Alternative application at HESA.org. You'll do that each year, just like U.S. citizens and eligible non-citizens do the FAFSA, to determine eligibility for state and institutional aid, because NJ Dreamers are not eligible for federal aid. Please also note, everybody will have to get familiar with HESA if you're a New Jersey resident, because they also determine state aid eligibility for New Jersey residents who are U.S. citizens and eligible non-citizens. So they look at your FAFSA also. Okay, the steps to apply for financial aid. The first step is to create a studentaid.gov account, also referred to as an FSA ID. If I have any parents who previously completed the FAFSA before the 24-25 academic year, it was previously called an FSA ID. Studentaid.gov account is the same thing. If you don't have one, students and parents will need an account, each their own separate account. So to create one, you'll go to studentaid.gov, create your account. You're going to have to enter information like your name, date of birth, social security number, and unique email, so parents and students can't use the same email, and then a phone number. And then that will all link with the Social Security Administration, and you'll be able to do the FAFSA. And as I mentioned, students need their own account, and then one or both parents, depending on the situation, may need their own account as well. If I have anybody who is an independent student who may be married, then the student and the spouse will need to create studentaid.gov accounts. Something important to note is that parents without a social security number can create a studentaid.gov account, but it is important to note that those parents will have to go through an additional identity verification process before they can complete the FAFSA. Okay, the next step is just that, completing the FAFSA. So what exactly is the FAFSA? As we mentioned, it's the free application for federal student aid, and it's your application for all federal and state aid, as well as some institutional aid. And what the FAFSA does is it uses demographic and financial information, including family size and income and assets from the student and their family, to determine a student's aid eligibility. So all your financial information goes into the FAFSA, and they spit out your financial aid eligibility. And I'll get into a little bit of how they do that in a minute. The application typically opens October 1st of each year. The past few years, the FAFSA was revamped. So it was delayed a little bit, but now it's written into law that it has to be available October 1st. And the Department of Ed did deliver on that promise this year. They actually did it a little bit early, but just know that typically the FAFSA is available by October 1st of each year. And as I mentioned earlier, anybody attending in spring of 2026, you're going to complete the 25-26 FAFSA. And those attending in fall of 2026 or spring of 2027, you're going to complete the 26-27 FAFSA. And both of those are available now. Please make sure you're doing the correct one. When you look at the years on the FAFSA, you want to think fall, spring. So if you were attending in fall 25 or spring 26, you're doing the 25-26 FAFSA. If you're attending in fall 26, spring 27, you're doing the 26-27 FAFSA. Can be a little confusing because they have multiple FAFSAs out at a time. So just make sure you're doing the correct one. Not that it's going to hurt anything if you do, the other one, but you're saving a little time if you only do one. Okay, some things to know before applying. Something that's new this year is that you can create your studentaid.gov account and complete the FAFSA in the same day. Previously, you had to wait around 3 days for the Department of Ed to verify your social security number with the Social Security Administration. Now that process is immediate, so that you can complete the FAFSA in the same day. So more convenient for students and families. One tip that I do have is that students should be starting the FAFSA. I know that a lot of times parents are helping their students or maybe even doing the FAFSA for them, but it's very important that the student starts the application with their own account and invites the parent to contribute to that application. The reason I say that is because there are times where we may have to go back in and make FAFSA corrections, different updates and things like that. And it gets a little difficult when the parent starts the application. It just makes things a lot easier when the student does it. So that's a big tip that I have for all of you who haven't done the FAFSA just yet. But as you know, going into that, students and parents complete their sections of the FAFSA separately. Dependent students add their parents as contributors to their FAFSA by entering their email into the application. If a student is independent and has a spouse, then they're going to enter their spouse's information. Contributors then receive an email with a code asking them to log into the FAFSA using their own studentaid.gov account, okay? They'll enter the code and then they'll be brought into the student's FAFSA. All contributors have to complete their sections of the application for a student's FAFSA to be submitted to federal student aid, okay? If just the student does their part, it's not going to be submitted until the parent does their part. Something else new within the past few years is called the direct data exchange. This makes filling out the FAFSA a lot easier for a majority of students and families. The direct data exchange will import your tax information directly into the FAFSA from the IRS. After you consent to that, of course. So without consent, students will not be eligible for federal student aid or eligible to receive an SAI. So you have to consent to this, even if you didn't file taxes in the tax year the FAFSA is asking for, if you didn't work in that year, you still have to consent to this process. Good news is consenting is very easy. It's just clicking a button that says I agree. And then the direct data exchange will import your information directly into the FAFSA. Okay, something else to note, child support received is reported as an asset on the FAFSA, and you're reporting the amount received in the last complete calendar year. Education savings plans for the applicant only are reported as parental assets, okay? So things like 529 plans, if you have multiple children, the only 529 plan that you're going to include on the FAFSA is the 529 plan for that student whose FAFSA you're working on, okay? You don't have to include the other ones for the other students. The net worth or value of businesses and farms must be reported on the FAFSA, okay? That's any business and farm, regardless of the number of people that you employ. That's for the 25-26 FAFSA, okay? Something new this year is they're actually going back to an old way. So in 24-25, they switched it up and made everybody report the value of businesses and farms, regardless of the number of employees you had. Now they're going back to the old way, where you only have to report the value and net worth of businesses and farms with over 100 employees, okay? That's effective 26-27. So anybody doing the 25-26 FAFSA, you do still have to report the net worth and value of all businesses and farms, but going forward, it is over 100 employees. And after completing the FAFSA, each student will receive their student aid index. This is kind of what I mentioned earlier, this is how the federal government determines your eligibility for financial aid. So they take all of your information and then they spit out this number. It's called your student aid index. It's really not super important for students and families, just because you're not really using that number at all. Schools are using that number in order to determine your eligibility for federal and state aid and some institutional aid programs as well. But we kind of use that behind the scenes to determine all of that. So when you see your student aid index, it's not what you're expected to pay. It's not what it's going to cost to go to college or anything like that. It's not what your financial aid is. It's not what you're receiving or anything like that. It's just a number that we use to determine eligibility. So don't look too much into it, but a good general rule is that the lower the number, it can go down to negative 1,500, the better your chance of receiving some need-based financial aid. All right, if you are doing the 25-26 FAFSA, you are going to use 2023 income information. So 1040s, it's good to have those on hand, just because if the direct data exchange for some reason doesn't work, If you have a situation where parents filed a married joint return in 2023, but now they're separated and only one parent is reported on the FAFSA, the direct data exchange will work, but it's also going to ask you to input manual information because we only want the information from the parent who's on the FAFSA. So it's always good to have ththese things on hand. So 1040s, W-2s, 1099s, anything like that. I already mentioned records of child support received, that amount from the last calendar year. And then current balances of cash, savings, and checking accounts, as well as the current value or net worth of investments, businesses, and farms. Right? The 26-27 FAFSA. So this FAFSA is going to require 2024 income information. So the FAFSA uses prior year, so that it gives you time to file your taxes and get everything straightened out by the time the FAFSA is available. Okay, and in turn we can get on aid offers earlier and all of that. So 2024 income information on the 26-27 FAFSA. So again, please try to have your 1040s, W-2s, 1099s, all that information available, just in case you do have to put anything in manually, okay? Records of child support received, and then those balances and net worths as well. I will also note because we use prior year, financial situations may have changed. If that is the case, you can contact the school to do what's called an income adjustment appeal. And then if the change in your family's financial situation has made a significant impact, we may be able to complete that income adjustment appeal. And what we do with that is we basically change the information on the FAFSA to make it more current and hopefully provide the student with some additional aid eligibility in that process. Okay, so which parents are reported on the FAFSA? This is a question that we get quite often. All situations are different, so it can get a little complicated. For parents who are married or parents who are unmarried and living together, both biological or adopted parents are reported on the FAFSA, okay? So both parents are going to be required in those two situations. If parents are divorced or separated, the custodial parent is the parent who is reported on the FAFSA. And the custodial parent is the parent who provides more than 50% of the student's financial support. If both parents provide equal support, then the parent with the greater income or assets is going to be reported. If the parents are divorced and the custodial parent is remarried, then both the custodial parent and the step parent's information is reported on the FAFSA. Even if, for example, they weren't married in the tax year the FAFSA is asking for, that's a situation where obviously they filed separately in that year. So they're both going to need studentaid.gov accounts to be able to log in and contribute to the student's FAFSA. But even though they didn't file together that year, their financial information is both required. In the case of unusual circumstances, there is a process where we can review a student's dependency status. So students are not able to select whether they're dependent or independent. So dependent basically means that parent information is required on the FAFSA. Independent means that parents' information is not required on the FAFSA. There are only certain criteria that will make a student independent. Age, if a student is 24 years old, if they're married, if they have legal dependents, children they support, if they're in the military, things like that will make a student independent. Otherwise, they're considered dependent for financial aid purposes. We do realize, however, that some students may not fit that criteria, but they may not, for whatever reason, be able to provide parent information on the FAFSA. Unusual circumstances like this include if a student was removed from their home because it was an unsafe or unstable environment, if they were abandoned by their parents and they don't know where they are, things like that could warrant a dependency status review. So if a student meets some of that criteria, and it's explained a little more in detail on the FAFSA, then they will select that they have an unusual circumstance. The FAFSA will be submitted to the school, but with a flag. And what that will tell the school is that this student selected they have an unusual circumstance and we need to follow up on that. And then we'll collect documentation from the student supporting their claims. And then if they are considered independent, then we'll go ahead and process their FAFSA like that. Okay, but the school does have to determine that. So just because a student answers that question that way doesn't mean that they'll automatically be considered independent. There are certain cases where we will actually have to tell the student that they need to go back in and add parent information. Okay, the next step in applying for financial aid is determining state aid eligibility. Here's HESA again, like I mentioned. So New Jersey's Higher Education Student Assistance Authority, also known as HESA, you can tell we use a lot of financial acronyms in financial aid, reviews student FAFSAs as well as NJ alternative applications to determine state aid eligibility. Any New Jersey resident who attends a New Jersey college or university is considered for state financial aid programs. And students can view this information, view their stated eligibility, and submit any additional requirements at njfams.hesa.org. New users will have to create an account. I really do recommend that everybody creates an account who's a New Jersey resident, just because it'll be easier if there is additional documentation requested or anything like that, and you become familiar kind of with their site. So I definitely recommend creating an account if you're a New Jersey resident. And keeping an eye out for anything to do with HESA. Federal student aid, the school communicates with you most of the time to determine eligibility if there's additional documentation required or things like that. HESA does their own part of that, so they'll communicate with students a lot. And we will on behalf of HESA as well, but please keep an eye out for things from them. And the last step here in the process to apply for financial aid is to complete outstanding requirements. One thing we see a lot is that students and families think, okay, I applied for a financial aid, now I'm good. Whatever my aid offer is what it's going to be. That's not necessarily the case. There are times where the federal government or the state government may select you for a process called verification, where we have to audit your FAFSA or audit, things on the FAFSA. If we have to do that, we will absolutely reach out to you. Annoyingly so, we'll send you a lot of different emails and texts as the student. All this information, by the way, does go to the student because of certain privacy laws. We can't send that information to the parents. So please, parents and any students who are listening, please make sure that you're checking your emails. I know that they're saturated with a lot of different things, but anytime you get something from financial aid, it's because we need something from you, or we need you to know something. And it will impact your financial aid eligibility. So if you don't complete a requirement, if you ignore the communications from our office or from the state, then you won't receive the aid that was offered to you in your financial aid offer. Okay, it's not set in stone until all requirements are complete, everything's reviewed, and your eligibility is confirmed. Okay, so please make sure that you are checking your emails. Sometimes we text you too, so please keep that in mind. When we do email you, if you have federal requirements or institutional requirements, we will direct you into the Go Stockton portal. Okay. Within the portal, you can view your financial aid requirements, you can view your financial aid offer, you can do a lot of different things in there. It's really the hub for all of Stockton. So familiarize yourself with that if you do choose to attend. But that is where you will be able to view your financial aid requirements for the university from the federal government and then submit those. We do also have a flag in there if you are selected for state verification, but you do all of that with the state. And this is their website. So this is that NJFAM site I mentioned creating an account for. You'll log into there as the student and they'll list out their requirements and how to complete those. Please keep in mind, if you do have requirements and you're not sure about them, you're not sure what to do, feel free to contact our office. We would be glad to help you submit anything. We want to make sure that you're submitting the right things. There are some times where we get, the wrong type of documentation, or something's cut off, or there's not a signature or something. So please, if you have any questions at all, feel free to contact us. We'll be glad to look over anything for you, just to make sure that everything is correctly submitted. Because at the end of the day, we want to see everybody succeed, and we want to see you get your financial aid. Okay, so now we learned a little bit about what aid is available. We learned how to apply for that aid. Now we're going to go over costs. One thing that I wish the Department of Ed would have revamped with the FAFSA is the term cost of attendance. The cost of attendance is a little confusing for some students and families. When you look at our costs online, you're looking at tuition and fees, housing and meals, right? So you have one price in your head. And then when you get your aid offer, you're going to see a cost of attendance, which is going to be a higher price than you saw on our website or wherever, our brochure, wherever you got costs from, okay? And that's because the cost of attendance includes two different components. It includes direct costs as well as indirect costs. So they in total make up the cost of attendance. Direct costs include direct expenses to the university, so tuition and fees and housing and a meal plan, things that we're going to bill you for. So you can think of direct costs as an estimate of your bill. Indirect costs include things like books and supplies, transportation, and other miscellaneous expenses. These are things that we're not going to bill you for, but expenses that you may incur as a result of attending school and things that we want you to think about. Okay, so it's going to cost more to attend than just your tuition and fees and your housing and meals because you're most likely going to need books. You may need some supplies. If you're commuting, you're going to have to drive to campus or take public transportation or whatever the case. So there are just different expenses that could come up. So we want you to get an overall idea of what it could cost to attend, okay? But when looking at this, if you just want to look at what it might cost you what you're going to pay the university for tuition and fees and housing and meals if you live on campus, then look at direct costs, okay? I just don't want that number to scare anybody if it's more than you were thinking originally. Okay, I like to show this too just to kind of illustrate the cost of attendance and then the gap that we're going to talk about. So here is an example of the cost of attendance. You have your direct costs, and then you have your indirect costs. There's your financial aid offer, which financial aid usually does not cover the entire cost, of what your bill or your cost of attendance. It usually doesn't cover everything. So most students are left with what we call the gap. Okay, now we're going to talk about that when we talk about covering your costs. So after determining costs and subtracting any financial aid that you're eligible for, whether that's grants and scholarships, you are going to determine how much additional funding may be needed to go to school, okay? And we call this filling the gap. And there are several ways to do this. One of the best ways is to reduce your costs, free money, scholarships, saving and making payments, and borrowing. So I'm going to go into a little bit of detail of each of these different things, okay? So one of the best ways that I said to reduce your costs is to reduce your gap is to reduce your costs. So consider the following options. Maximizing your credits, okay? Consider taking additional credits each semester to graduate early. So at Stockton, we have what's called a flat rate tuition. So you can take anywhere between 12 and 20 credits and pay the same price, okay? So you're gonna pay the same price whether you're taking 12 or 20 credits. So some students will take advantage, take 20 credits, maximize their financial aid, and they will potentially graduate early doing that. Especially if you're taking, a summer course here and there, you could graduate early, either a semester, a year, whatever the case, and that'll end up saving you a lot of money in the long run. So definitely take advantage of that. Maybe not your first semester, kind of plant your feet on the ground, see exactly what you can handle, and then if you think you can handle that extra course, definitely consider that. Okay, next, choosing cheaper options, of course. So choosing cheaper housing options, possibly. Is there a cheaper meal plan option? Renting textbooks instead of buying them. I can tell you from personal experience, I thought I had to buy all the textbooks in my major, and now they just sit and collect dust in my basement. So renting is really the way to go typically, unless you think you really may need the textbook for future, for studying or something like that, for maybe the GRE or something like that. Okay, scholarships. So scholarships are everywhere, and we don't see students take advantage of them as much as they should. Okay, so where can we find scholarships? That's one of the biggest things. Local organizations. So for example, your local Rotary Club. The student on the left side of your screen applied for a scholarship with his local Rotary Club, and he received a laptop. That helped cut that indirect expense of the supply that he needed for school and that laptop. So local organizations, a lot of them will give scholarships, okay? Scholarship search sites, for example, FastWeb is a good one. You can search anything on FastWeb, any of your interests, your major, somebody in our office got a scholarship for being left-handed. So there's a ton of different things out there. So I would recommend using those. Now, always caution if they ask for anything like a social security number, they ask you to pay to apply. Those are red flags you don't want to do. But there are a lot of different opportunities out there, so take advantage of those as well. The main thing with scholarships is to put in the work. Nothing is free, right? So applying for scholarships takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, but it can really be worth it in the end. The next one I want to talk about is high school. So if I have I know I have high school students and parents of high school students in the audience, please check with your guidance counselors for scholarships, lots of local scholarships. So a lot of times those local organizations will end up going to high schools, going to guidance counselors and saying, I have a scholarship and I want to give it to a student at your high school. Here's the application, please have them apply. And so many times there are very few people that will actually apply for those scholarships. And I get it. Seniors in high school are very busy. This whole process is a lot, choosing a school and financial aid and all of that. But if there aren't too many students applying for those, then the chances of getting them are a little better. So make sure that you're consulting with your guidance counselor, seeing if there's anything available out there, and applying for those local scholarships, because your chances of receiving those are a lot better than the national ones. And then students or their parents' employers. So the student on the right here worked for Chick-fil-A, and she received a $25,000 scholarship to attend school. Not everybody's as generous as Chick-fil-A is, but there are definitely employers out there that you may not think will offer any benefit, and they may. A lot of employers will also offer tuition reimbursement, things like that, where you pay out of pocket and then they reimburse you if you get a certain grade. So definitely something to look into. If you do have a job as the student, contact the HR or corporate or of whoever, whatever company you work for, to see if they offer any tuition benefits. Okay, and then I've also seen students come in with scholarships from their parents' employers as well. So parents, please, check with your HR as well to see if, your students could receive any type of scholarship as well from your employer. And then at Stockton, so of course I mentioned earlier our admission scholarships, our merit scholarships, and our scholarships for transfers. Once you're a student at Stockton, the opportunity for scholarships does not stop. You can apply for after your first semester, and when you have a Stockton GPA, you can apply for our foundation scholarships. What they are is donors will come to Stockton and basically say they want to donate money to the school to give scholarships to students. There are certain criteria for some of them, others are more general. So for example, certain ones you might have to have a certain major, other ones are just general, a student who, does well in school, participates, that kind of thing. So definitely keep an eye out for that. That's a great opportunity. It's one application for hundreds of different scholarships. You can get one, you can get several. The amounts range from a few $100s to a few thousand. Anything helps. I know scholarships take a lot of time to apply for, but they are really worth it in the end. It can save you a lot of money. Okay, next, this is an obvious one, but I still like to put it in here, saving and making payments. So if you haven't started already, start saving now, because any contribution you can make towards your education now will save you money later, okay? Working a part-time job, either during the summers or while you're in school, can really help to cover some of your expenses. And then take advantage of payment plans as well. So at Stockton, we bill per semester. So whatever costs you see on your aid offer, we'll break them down fall and spring, because we bill fall and spring. And then if you take summer classes, that's totally separate. But so what we'll do is we'll bill you for fall, and you can do a payment plan of up to 5 payments for that semester. Same thing with spring. We also offer payment plans for the summer as well. But take advantage of that, because what that'll do is that'll take whatever you owe and divide it into as many as 5 payments. And they're usually monthly. For fall, those payments begin in July and end in November. And then for spring, they usually begin in December and end in April. Definitely take advantage of that. You can use that combined with borrowing as well, which we'll talk about in a minute. But if you can afford to make any payments towards your bills, say you can afford, 1,000 throughout the semester, and then you want to borrow the rest, you can do that. That will end up saving a lot of money, okay? Because loans will of course come with interest, which is what I'm going to talk about next. It's actually one of my favorite topics to talk about. I did my master's capstone on financial literacy and borrowing. So I really like to talk about this and educate students and families on borrowing and interest rates. Okay, it's a fact that many or most students have to borrow or take out loans to cover the costs of their education. Okay, it's not something to be afraid of. It's just important to be informed about it, and understand the process, understanding loans, how interest rates work, all of that. Okay, some loan options that are available for students include federal direct loans. These loans come directly from the U.S. Department of Education. Students apply by filing the FAFSA every year, and they are offered up to a certain amount depending on their grade level each year. Usually it's not enough to cover the entire gap, but it is a loan or loans at a lower interest rate than many private loans. So that'll end up saving students money. So we usually recommend utilizing the federal direct loans before any type of private loan, okay? The next option is going to be private loans. Anyone who will lend to you really, banks, credit unions, anybody like that. That's where you're going to be getting your private education loans from. With private loans, the student is the borrower in majority of cases, and the parent or whoever is, a family friend, anybody who's willing to co-sign would be a co-signer or an endorser for that loan. Okay. And then Parent Direct Plus loans are also another option for parents who would like to borrow for their student. Parent Direct Plus loans are through the federal government. They are a credit-based loan, but it is the U.S. Department of Education. The interest rate can sometimes be lower than private loans. It really depends. So I would say explore both options. But if the parent would like to borrow on behalf of the student, then they can do that through that loan program. It's important to know, though, parents, that you have the sole responsibility to repay that loan. That is your loan that you're borrowing on behalf of the student. So the student has no legal responsibility to repay that loan. If you and your student come up with an agreement, then that's between you, but the parent is the borrower in that case, and they're responsible for repayment on that loan. As I mentioned, don't be afraid of borrowing, just be informed and responsible with it, okay? Understand interest rates, understand repayment and how all of that works, okay? Interest rates, you have to think of interest as a fee to borrow a loan, right? The lower the interest rate, the less you're paying to borrow it. And with repayment, the quicker that you repay the loan, the less you're going to pay because the less interest is going to accrue on those loans, okay? So it's important not to over borrow, okay? Because at that point, if you have the funding, use it now. Okay, because interest will keep accruing. You're going to keep adding to the principal of your loan, and then you're going to end up paying a lot more back. Here's an example I like to give for two different reasons. I feel like it helps explain interest really well. And I also like to give this because it explains the benefits of those federal direct loans. Okay, so this is just an example. These are not real costs. I just put some even numbers in there to make this a little easier to calculate and to understand. Okay, so my example is your total costs for the year are $30,000, okay, but you received $10,000 in free money. You're unable to make payments, so now you need to borrow the rest, which would be $20,000 for the year in loans. First year students are offered $5,500 in federal direct loans. Second years are offered $6,500, and then third and fourth years are offered $7,500 in those loans. But for this example, I used a first year student who would receive $5,500 in federal direct loans, okay? Like I said, those loans typically come at a lower interest rate than most private loans. So if we take the $20,000, subtract the $5,500 loan, we're left having to borrow $14,500 additional, okay? $5,500 at the 6.39% interest rate that it currently is will cost you $7,457.28 over 10 years, which is the standard repayment for federal direct loans, okay? So not a ton that you're having, it's less than $2,000 in interest over 10 years, which is pretty good, especially for education loans. But I have a lot of parents come to me and question why they should take these loans. $14,500 at a 9.99% interest rate. So I'm saying that this is a private loan and your interest rate is 9.99%. That's a pretty good middle ground, I would say, for private loan interest rates. I've seen ones that are less, and I've seen a lot that are a lot more. So I picked that as a good middle ground, okay? But $14,500 at a 9.99% interest rate will cost you $45,770.67 over 30 years, okay? Obviously, if you repay that loan in or more quickly than 30 years, then of course you're going to end up paying less because there's not as much time for that interest to accrue. But that is how much it would cost you over 30 years. So your total to repay on $20,000 is $53,227.95. Now, the parents who come to me and they ask, why would I take two different loans? I just want to take one loan. I would just want to take the $20,000 loan. This illustrates why you shouldn't do that. Okay, $20,000 at a 9.99% interest rate will cost you $63,131.95 over 30 years. The difference between those two options is almost $10,000. Okay, that's why you should take the federal direct loans before a private loan. Unless you can get a private loan with an interest that's less than those, that's why you should take them, because you didn't borrow any more one way or the other, and you're paying $10,000 more going with that second option. So just something to keep in mind. I wish that I was told that as a student way back when, so I like to kind of highlight that for students and parents now. Okay, and that is pretty much all of the info that I have to share tonight. Please feel free to follow us on our social medias, at Stockton FinAid on Facebook, Instagram, and X. We do put out scholarship opportunities on X, and we also just put out a lot of good tips, tricks, deadlines, a ton of information really for students and families, just so that you're informed and aware of different things that are going on. And we know everybody's on their social media, so it's just another spot for us to reach you, you know, so we can inform you about whether it's a deadline or something like that. And then here's just some helpful resources. I have federal student aid listed here, HESA for state aid, and then our Stockton Financial Aid Office as well. You can schedule a phone appointment using that QR code there, or going to stockton.edu/contact-finaid. If you do have any very personal questions that you don't feel comfortable sharing in the Q&A that we're going to do, then please feel free to schedule an appointment. Or you can email or call our office. There's also an option to email within that. And we'd be glad to, you know, chat with you and go over any questions that you might have. And finally, if you haven't done so already, feel free to, you know, be sure to apply to Stockton. You can do so at stockton.edu/apply. We're accepting applications for the fall of 2026 and the spring for first-year students, and then the spring of 2026 as well. That is pretty much everything. If you haven't visited campus, or if you'd like to come back and learn more, please feel free to schedule an in-person tour. We also have virtual tours available online. You can learn more about that stuff at stockton.edu/visit. And I did just put our socials for the university at the bottom, as well as contact information for admissions. If you have any questions. Admissions does handle our merit-based scholarships. We kind of manage them after they're offered to students in financial aid, but they actually determine a student's eligibility for those initially. So if any questions about those, please feel free to reach out to admissions, either contacting them by phone or email, and they'd be glad to go over any of that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen here. I'm also going to stop recording, and then